When I was 16, my parents told me to leave home because they needed space for my sister's new baby. Feeling abandoned, I shared my story online, and when my dad realized that his wealthy parents might cut him out of their will, he pleaded with me to take down the post. I just turned 16 last week, but there was no celebration or party for me. My parents barely acknowledged my birthday before telling me I had to leave our house. It turns out my older sister Amanda, who's always been their favorite, is pregnant. Despite having enough space in our four-bedroom house, they want me to move to my aunt's place to make room for the baby. My parents have never been very caring towards me, but this felt like a new low. They were dead serious during our talk, so I knew they weren't joking or trying to prank me. After explaining that they needed the extra space and that I was old enough to leave, we sat in silence for a while. They promised to continue supporting me financially until I turned 18 and ensure I had everything I needed, but they couldn't have me living with them anymore. I didn't want to argue, but I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the nursery. They hesitated before admitting they'd given it to Amanda's boyfriend to stay with them. So in short, my parents had their own room, my sister and her boyfriend had another, and the baby would have its own too. Amanda wasn't home, probably on purpose to avoid seeing me leave and feeling guilty. We weren't close due to our age gap, but she'd never been mean to me either. We were mostly polite to each other. But if she was okay with me leaving so she could make room for her baby and boyfriend, maybe she wasn't the sister I thought she was. It hurt, especially on my birthday, but I didn't argue and agreed to go. It's clear to me now that my parents are beyond help. There's no magic phrase to make my parents care about me, and I've come to terms with that. So when they said they wanted me to move in with my aunt, I quietly went to my room and started packing. They helped, but it felt more like they were hurrying me along. They drove me to my aunt's, chatting happily all the way, oblivious to my silence as I stared out the window. When we arrived, they dropped me off without a hug or kiss, then drove off. My aunt greeted me warmly, genuinely happy to see me. We talked, and eventually, I shared my disappointment with my parents' actions. Her smile vanished, replaced by concern, when I recounted the morning's events. Without a word, my aunt grabbed her phone and excused herself to make a call in the other room. It was unusually quiet for a while until I heard her raising her voice, something she rarely did. I knew someone must have really upset her to provoke such a reaction. When she returned, her face was flushed with anger, a rare sight for her gentle demeanor. She explained that it was my parents who had angered her so much. Apparently, my dad, her brother, had falsely claimed that I had suggested the living arrangement for the baby's sake and that I was perfectly content moving in with my aunt. That's why my aunt was fine with taking me in. She could see I wasn't happy living with my parents, so my suggestion didn't seem out of place to her. Dad tried to persuade her, but she's single and not planning on marriage or kids, so having me around was like having a roommate, and Dad would cover my expenses. She genuinely liked having me and thought I wanted to be there, so she agreed. But now that she knew the truth, she called Dad to confront him. It was messed up, and she wasn't going to let it slide. After the call, she was upset, and so was I. This wasn't something most kids my age dealt with. I always knew they favored my sister, but this was extreme. They had lied to my aunt to cover up their actions, knowing how terrible it was. They gave up the guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job, and his own place. Amanda could have easily moved in with him, but my parents insisted she stay home to be closer to them, even if it meant sacrificing my comfort. It hurt me deeply, so I decided to go online and reveal what they had done. Unsure if my aunt would support me, I waited until she left the room, then posted everything on my phone without a second thought. I detailed not only that day's events, but also how my parents consistently treated me unfairly, making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. It was an emotional moment for me, and the post reflected that. After posting, tears streamed down my face. I turned off my phone, fearing the consequences. An hour later, I attempted to read but couldn't concentrate. When my aunt woke up, she hurried to the living room, where I sat since arriving. She calmly asked if I had posted something. I admitted I had. That was the extent of our conversation. I powered on my phone to find that family members had seen the post, and I had received numerous texts from my parents and sister. Meanwhile, relatives commented, expressing support, some reaching out to offer help. Despite the support from relatives, reading my parents' messages filled me with dread. They were seething with anger and hatred, demanding I remove the post. My dad's messages were particularly hurtful, even expressing regret for my existence. My mom's echoed his sentiments. The only slightly different message came from my sister, who simply asked to speak in person. I was overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and messages, unsure how to respond. So, I set my phone aside and withdrew from communication for a few days. Eventually, I decided to block my parents, feeling no desire to engage with them further. I knew my parents were obligated to support me financially until I turned 18, so besides that, I saw no reason to communicate with them. My aunt supported my decision, and if my dad tried to contact her, she didn't mention it to me. We acted as if nothing had happened, indicating her support for me. That was all I needed. For the past week, I had little to no contact with my parents. However, today they unexpectedly appeared outside my school, visibly upset. Fortunately, my friends, who were aware of the situation, surrounded me as a protective barrier, allowing me to avoid interaction with my parents if I chose not to. Despite my reluctance, they continued calling my name, forcing me to acknowledge them. I approached them and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them. However, they ignored my plea and insisted that I accompany them home immediately. Their sudden change of heart baffled me, considering how little I mattered to them before. It seemed like they were only concerned about their reputation among family members. Refusing to go anywhere until I understood their motives, I demanded an explanation for their behavior. They appeared angry yet insistent on my return. Concerned about my friends overhearing, I requested privacy to speak with them. Once my friends were out of earshot, my parents revealed the reason for their sudden appearance. They explained that they needed me to come back because I had been ignoring their calls and texts, and it was crucial for them to have me return to secure their inheritance. After my online post, word spread throughout the family, reaching my grandparents. Knowing that my paternal grandparents were quite wealthy, they threatened my dad, stating that if they didn't improve their treatment of me and reconcile, my dad would forfeit his inheritance. They were informed that if they failed to mend our relationship and ensure my well-being, my aunt, who was caring for me, would inherit instead. Losing the inheritance was not an option for my dad, as it represented a significant amount of money. Although my parents had a decent income, I understood their desire to secure their inheritance. However, their approach left much to be desired. It was clear they were acting in their own self-interest, not mine. Their lack of empathy was glaring, and I refused to play along. I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away, ignoring their pleas. Taking the bus back to my aunt's, I recounted the ordeal to her, and she shared my frustration. To prevent a repeat, she enlisted the help of her lawyer to explore options for my custody. Despite my parents' legal rights, I knew changes were necessary for me to live with my aunt. I also reached out to my grandparents to thank them for intervening, but made it clear I had no desire to return home after experiencing life with my aunt. I finally felt liberated. Living with my parents had been stifling, and I held on to hope for change that never came. Since my grandparents lived in another city, our meetings were infrequent. However, during holiday gatherings, my parents put on a facade to conceal the truth of my treatment at home. It wasn't outright cruelty, but rather neglect and avoidance. While everything appeared fine on the surface, spending a few days at my parents' house would reveal that they mostly ignored me, focusing solely on my sister. With her pregnancy, the situation worsened, and I was completely sidelined. I confided in my grandparents about everything, and they assured me that if living with my aunt was what I wanted, they would ensure it happened. They promised to cover all my needs if my parents relinquished their rights. This conversation brought me immense relief, but it was short-lived. Just a few hours later, I received an email from my dad. It wasn't hostile, but it was disheartening. He expressed disappointment in my decision to share our family issues online, arguing that my grandparents would have learned about it eventually. Now, not only were my grandparents upset with them, but they were also facing backlash from other relatives, feeling ostracized, which they deemed unfair. He mentioned that even some of his colleagues had come across the post because it was public and had appeared on their feeds due to his tagging. This had created an uncomfortable situation for him at work, and he believed that my actions had unnecessarily stirred up drama in their lives. In hindsight, I regretted sharing the story about my parents asking me to leave on my 16th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your supportive words mean a lot to me, so thank you. Now, addressing some of the questions many of you have asked regarding why I hadn't left my parents' house earlier and why I waited for them to ask me to leave, especially when my grandparents and aunt were willing to assist. The reason I didn't seek help earlier is that, as I mentioned in the original post, I wasn't subjected to outright cruelty. While I wasn't treated poorly, I felt ignored and unwelcome, which in its own way is a form of mistreatment. However, I convinced myself that as long as I had shelter and food, I was fine, even if I didn't feel loved. The neglect had become so normalized for me that I didn't realize its impact. As for why I didn't turn to my family for assistance, I didn't want to burden them. I feared the consequences if they refused to help and my parents found out. My parents placed great importance on appearances, so I kept my struggles to myself, suffering in silence. Additionally, my aunt didn't offer to take me in earlier out of respect for my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would want to live with her. However, the current situation unfolded naturally, and in hindsight, it's turned out for the best, albeit a bit late. My aunt is currently consulting with a lawyer to pursue transferring my custody rights to her, which will likely be challenging given the stakes involved with the inheritance. However, I have confidence that my grandparents and aunt will support me, even if it leads to legal proceedings. My aunt has been genuinely remorseful since my arrival, acknowledging the neglect I faced at home and regretting not intervening sooner. At least now, there's clarity within my family, and I'm feeling optimistic about the future. Regarding my sister, she reached out to me, expressing a desire to meet in person. Unsure how to respond, I chose to ignore her message. While she hasn't been overtly unkind to me personally, she has adopted the same distant behavior as my parents. I had assumed that the decision to kick me out for her boyfriend and child was her idea, leading me to believe that our relationship might sour further as a result. I didn't respond to her initial message. Despite our strained relationship, I still felt closer to her than my parents because she treated me kindly whenever we interacted. It wasn't her fault that my parents favored her over me. So when she reached out again 3 days ago, asking me to visit, I decided to call her and inquire about her intentions. I assumed she wanted me to come back home, but to my surprise, she explained that she was currently living with her boyfriend and wasn't feeling well enough to go out. Instead, she wanted us to discuss the family situation. Intrigued, I agreed to meet her. Upon arriving, she began by apologizing for never standing up for me, despite knowing our parents' biased treatment. While they overlooked my achievements to celebrate hers, I always felt like the least wanted child. However, she admitted to never feeling comfortable confronting our parents about this issue, especially since I appeared to tolerate it. Her reluctance to speak up contributed to the status quo. Now realizing how unfair this was, she apologized and expressed a desire for change. She also revealed that the living arrangement was a surprise to her, as our parents hadn't discussed it with her. She was shocked to learn that they had asked me to leave to make room for the new baby and her boyfriend because she had no prior knowledge of this plan. In fact, she hadn't requested any such arrangement. Her original intention was to stay with our parents until the baby was a few months old, at which point she planned to move in with her boyfriend. She had considered leaving earlier but stayed at our parents' insistence. However, after reading my post, she realized that the situation couldn't continue and decided to move out within a week. This decision led to a major confrontation with our parents, who disagreed with her choice to leave. They accused her of being ungrateful and selfish, despite the fact that she had never made any promises to them. They had simply assumed things on their own. As a result of this disagreement, they stopped speaking to each other. In the end, all the drama amounted to nothing as my parents ended up losing both of their children. At least she had the decency to apologize for her shortcomings as a sister and as a person in general, which I accepted because harboring resentment wouldn't benefit me in any way. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and she assured me, much like my aunt did, that she would be there for me unconditionally from now on. It was a comforting reassurance. It's been almost a week since I made my original post, and I still haven't heard from my parents since the email. I assume they've abandoned their attempts to reconcile with me. I suspect my grandparents played a role in this, as they called me to inform me that my parents would no longer bother me and that I need not worry about them showing up at my school or contacting me again. I hadn't mentioned my dad's email to them, so I assumed there was a discussion between my parents and grandparents. Although I'm unsure about the details of their conversation, I believe my parents have given up by now. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today my aunt delivered some surprising news. My parents have agreed to relinquish their parental rights. The legal formalities are underway, and soon my aunt will become my legal guardian. It's a mix of emotions for me. On one hand, I'm relieved that I'll finally have a home where I feel valued and wanted, but on the other hand, there's a sense of emptiness and sadness. It's strange to finally see this happening, but I know it's for the best. This is what I've been hoping for. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt took over as my legal guardian. It's official now, and I couldn't be happier. Interestingly, I learned that my parents agreed to give up custody because my grandparents gave them an ultimatum: either lose their entire inheritance or keep 50% and forfeit custody of me, with the condition that they never contact me again. I'm not surprised by their choice, and honestly, I'm not even upset. It feels like I've escaped a troubling situation. Good riddance, I say. I'm still in contact with my sister, although my parents are attempting to reconcile with her before her due date. However, she's requested some time alone, urging them to respect her space and cease their daily attempts to reach out. Honestly, I can't help but chuckle at the chaotic situation they created within their own family. But you know what? I'm content with my aunt, and that's all that truly matters to me.